Brilliant, thank you, John. So moving on to the situation we now find ourselves in, I think the killer question here comes in from James McQuaid, which is, what is your view on liquidations and damages in context of COVID-19? Will these kick in?
That's a very good question. And this is going to become a very interesting situation or scenario that's going to very much would be interesting to watch how it's going to unravel over the forthcoming months and years. The first thing I would say is that when you're worried about, for example, projects being shut down, half of your staff going into self-isolation, etc., what you really need to do is to start looking very carefully at what your contract is and what your contract says, because that's going to be absolutely key. For example, obviously I'm talking about JCT contracts again, but there are provisions in JCT contracts for certain events. Now there's force majeure, which is a relevant event in JCT contracts. And that is it's something that will give contractors and subcontractors a potential entitlement to an extension of time. Now, I say potential because actually force majeure is not actually a defined term. And in actual fact, I don't think it even has a recognised meaning in English law. Its translation from French is literally a superior force. So, as you can imagine, what one has to do is that they have to look at any situation that arises, and then they've got to assess it on its facts, and whether that purported event prevented performance under the contract. Now, as far as I could find out from my research, there's actually no reported case law on the meaning of force majeure under JCT contracts. Although it's been suggested that term for force majeure should have a restricted meaning because of other relevant events, such as war strikes fire, where government action might actually be required. So you've got to start from your contract. What does it say? Because also some contracts where the term force majeure does exist, the contract might have been amended, or that definition. So please, first of all, look at the contract. So you have got, in JCT contracts, a relevant event, which is force majeure. You've also got other provisions in JCT contracts where, for example, where you've got a change in law, which we might well have in the current situation. So under those contracts, if there's the exercise of a statutory power by the United Kingdom government or local or public authority after you've entered into the contract, now that in itself could be a relevant event under a JCT contract, which would mean that you would be entitled to apply for an extension of time, to mean that obviously if your contract gets extended, that you won't be levied with LADs and the like. But also, then that's going to probably beg the question, well, okay, we don't get levied with LADs if we can get an extension of time because there's been a force majeure event that is recognised under the contract, i.e. if COVID-19 does become or is classified by government or someone else as a recognised force majeure event, meaning that you can get an extension of time, then that's great. Then as a contractor or subcontractor, you're going to be having ongoing costs incurred for your site, whether you like it or not. You're going to have all sorts of facilities on site that might be site security, it might be site huts, it might be site toilets, all preliminary type matters. And then you'll be thinking, well, actually, hold on, surely I must be able to have some entitlement to recover some of those costs. Well, actually, that's where I think the situation is going to be quite a bit unclear. And I think that contractors are probably slightly more risk. Whilst they might get exemptions for LADs if they're lucky under the contract and the contract has provision for that, I think they're possibly less likely to be able to recover money for what we call relevant matters under the JCT contract, because force majeure and the relief that can arise from that are not recognised under the JCT contracts.
I think that's probably as clear an answer we get at the moment. And I do know, John, that the CLC are seeking clarification from government on force majeure as well. So we are expecting some guidance to come down from the CLC in terms of what force majeure might mean. There's another link question here, which is actually, it's probably, I think I actually repeat the same question. Force majeure, I'm concerned that force majeure won't cut it. So that's a repeat the same question. Would there be any plans to update the JCT contracts in light of COVID-19?
I think it wouldn't be something that would have any retrospective effect, because it'd be very much about the contract at the time that you entered into it. And I think the short answer for your members is just simply say that as regards force majeure, if it can be demonstrated that COVID-19 is something that is a force majeure event, and that in itself is an interesting one, because if you actually think about it, there's going to be an argument saying, well, it's not, because COVID-19 is basically a member of a virus group that includes the relatively harmless common cold. So it's certainly going to be a lot of different debate about it. And I think your member who wrote in saying that force majeure may not cut it is probably on the ball there at the moment. But who knows, in these current uncertain times, anything is possible. But in direct answer to your question, the important point at this time is when you enter into the contract, what do the contractual provisions say? And I can be certain that they won't have said anything about COVID-19. So it's really, one would hope that the parties, in light of the current events, are going to be reasonable, and that if people have had to shut down sites because of it, that extensions of time are going to be provided. But I think it's going to probably be a give and take situation where you won't get levied for LADs, but then you won't be entitled to additional costs that you've incurred under the contract. So there's a little bit of a trade-off in that respect.
John, one other question, this might be a little bit unfair because I know it's slightly out of your area, but another area that we're getting asked a lot of questions around is statutory sick pay and layoff clauses. And obviously, again, it's the contract that defines what your responsibilities are as an employer. Do you think there's any situation or circumstance where government could give us the opportunity or could put out a dictate or emergency legislation to say that it would be unreasonable in such a time for employers to be held to things over and above what's sort of described in common law as reasonable?
Are you talking about in the context of the construction contract or employment contract?
I was thinking more employment contract there, John. I know it's slightly outside of your remit.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to answer that by saying that it's very much a watch this space, because we're seeing some extremely interesting legislation coming out from government that in our lifetime we probably thought we would never see. Lockdowns and potentially stopping people from going out and even arresting people if they do and the like. And with that sort of backdrop, and in light of events that have gone on, I think that people are going to be, government is going to have to look very carefully at all sorts of manner of legislation to deal with various situations. I think for the moment, though, your members have got to look at what the employment contracts say and what the obligations are under those, and very much follow that route for the time being.
And again, if they need to step outside of that, it's about having conversations with the workforce, isn't it? Because those can be amended in agreement with the workforce. Listen, John, it may not have all been stuff we want to hear, but it was all useful stuff. And I'm sure if you could hear everybody, the round of applause you're getting now would be louder than the boo you got when you declared yourself as a quantity surveyor. Thanks very much indeed. And Claire, if you could pass the presentation back across to me, we'll carry on with the rest of the meeting. So thanks very much indeed.